And we are live. Hello, everyone. This is My Two Cents, and welcome to the March Patrons Hangout. This is a live stream I host once a month, or at least once a month, where anyone who supports me on Patreon, Subscribestar, or Bitbacker can get in and talk about whatever they want to. So this can be really serious and get into deep philosophical stuff, or it can be about totally non-serious, non-political, whatever anyone wants to talk about. But before we get started, just want to give everyone a reminder. I'm currently in a partnership with the app Phone Me. Phone Me is an app that was developed to make it easier for you to connect with your favorite content creators, business owners, celebrities, what have you. There are a number of people currently using it. And essentially, by signing up for the app, you can pay a small fee to either talk to or message either content creators, celebrities, whoever's using the app. But also, they've added a new feature now that those content creators like myself can also use it to send messages to their followers. Right now, I have 14 followers on Phone Me, and I've been sending at least 2 messages out there per day that I'm not sending on Twitter or Gab or any of my other social media. So if you want to head down to the link that's in the description right now, it's the fourth and final link after Subscribestar, Patreon, or Bitbacker. Download Phone Me. That would really help me out, and it's a up-and-coming communication social media type app. But with that out of the way, I'm joined by 4 of my patrons right now: Night Shift 10,000, Scorch 88, Pacna Sesam, and Mag. So, and I see Pipsqueak just joined us. So,
Sorry, what?
So hello to everyone, and I guess let's kick this off. Who's got something they want to talk about first?
Sorry. Who's the Scorch? So you mentioned, I think you mentioned earlier before we started about whether slander is a violation of the NAP.
Yep. Okay, just to give everybody a heads up, right before we started, we were having a discussion, and the question that was asked is, would slandering another person, in other words, telling a lie about them, to deliberately, knowingly lying about someone in order to ruin their career or otherwise make their life miserable, would that be a violation of the NAP? That was the question.
Yeah, I guess I would hold that it is a violation of the NAP because the key thing there is the intention. The key thing there is the intention, and the fact that you're not it's not like, this isn't like, oh, I don't know what I'm talking about. This is, I know these are lies, and I'm deliberately trying to either destroy your contracts that you have with other people or through voluntary associations or whatnot. So as far as I'm concerned, just because of the basis of the intention and that it's deliberately known to be a lie, yes, I think that would qualify an app, just like I would consider a threat to be a violation of an app because that's essentially a future claim on aggression.
Well, that's not a violent attack against somebody, though. I mean, the NAP is really more reserved for violent attacks on somebody. I mean, if somebody's talking shit about you, you can basically refute that. You can even talk shit about them in response. So, I mean...
Well, sure. Obviously, that's where the whole point of proportionality comes into play. You can't... I mean, if someone's talking is basically just, trying to ruin your... Obviously, you can't, grab a stick and whip them over the head with it. That's obviously disproportionate. That's the whole. But no, I'd still hold it's a violation of the NAP. I don't think the NAP is necessarily purely physical attacks.
Okay, I think let's as to Night's comments about someone talking shit, I think there would be there is a point where certain lies might be frivolous, whereas others are more deliberate. Let's take, for example, Christine Blasey Ford and Brett Kavanaugh. Someone deliberately creates a story about a false assault that never happened with the deliberate intention of blocking someone's career.
One thing I think that needs to get taken into consideration is the fact of that, like, say, for example, as you're talking about with false rape accusations, if people believe that and the person gets arrested for it, that could ruin them for their entire lives. And even after they're out, they'll be on the sex offender list, which will hurt them for the rest of their lives, even if it didn't actually happen. So, yes, he's not physically beating you over the head, or it's not instead violence physically. It can destroy someone's career, someone's life, and for years to come. And when it and they may not ever get the justice that they deserve.
Mm-hmm. And I think the one thing I had also said before we started, but again, you have to ask the question, if we're talking about whether or not a certain action is justified, well, again, the person who wants to take the active position, in this case, slandering someone would be the active action. If the burden of proof is on them to justify that why it's okay to do that, and if they're going to argue that if I have the right to slander so and so, well then consistently it would follow that so and so also has the right to slander me. And unless they can demonstrate why they and they alone have a right to slander someone, but no one else has the right to slander them, then they would be being inconsistent. So I would hold there's seeing as there is no one who wants to be unjustly slandered. I mean, people can claim I don't care if I'm unjustly slandered, but then I think, but the moment it happens, of course, suddenly they care. So again, I think there's no way you could consistently justify why you and you alone have the right to slander people, but no one else does.
Well,
Right.
okay. The only thing I mentioned there is you do mention the consistency. So you've got two fundamental scenarios there. So it's either everyone can slander each other or no one can slander each other. Now, between those two, they're both universally consistent. You'd have to say, okay, how do you decide between which one is fall back to a subjective preference, as in, oh, okay, I don't like it. That doesn't make it consistently, like, that doesn't really make your ethic objective anymore. So how do you distinguish between which of those two universal propositions you want to go with?
One thing I just thought of is also the fact that because slandering is with words, of course, to a certain, if someone's going to make an accusation like that, I think it depends on how far they go with it. Like if they brought it to like a private police station, or if they just said it to them in like a tweet or something and not actually like go full blown with it. And also with the fact that I don't know how much you could really do with it, because I don't think we want to get to the point to where we're censoring words or something like that. But again, I think it depends on what degree they're doing with it and how much they want to destroy someone's life.
Uh-huh.
Well,
but
okay.
As in terms of with the nap and whatnot, I think that's left to more with either violence or with threatening to physically hurt someone or their property.
Right.
What
I think
about
that would
fraud,
be probably labeled
though?
under something else.
Well,
So-
Wait, what?
fraud is a violation of that.
I don't know.
Well,
Yes,
it's
but-
quick. Fraud is a violation of the NAP in virtue of the fact that it would be a violation of a contractual agreement. In other words, if I agree to buy a piece of gold from you, and you sell me, a piece of fool's gold, well, then you've violated the terms of the contract, because the agreement was I would give you a certain amount of money for a real piece of gold. If you give me a fake piece of gold, then you violated the contract.
Plus, a good rule on that front is always look at the merch that you're buying before you buy it. Always do that. Never buy something just out of,
Right,
out of you trust somebody.
Okay, since we're talking about the NAP, there's not really technically one. I haven't really seen one single definition. I mean, I've seen many that are kind of in the same ballpark. But I mean, what is your view of the NAP? Do you view it more in natural rights sense of it's something that, as part of being like a free willing, free thinking, conscious being, you have these rights that are given by nature, or do you view it more as, which is more of my view, is it's more of a contractual view, namely that scarcity is an issue and that basically we have to establish these property rules of who can control what, and that also includes the person, as a means to basically avoid just basically violent resolutions.
It's a little bit of both, actually, if you want to know the truth. It's a little bit of both of those. It does stem from natural common law, but it also aids kind of that property ownership and property propagation. It's both, more or less. At least that's the way I see it.
And personally, I'd say, and one thing that comes up like in discussions of in deep philosophical discussions about morality, what constitutes true right and wrong? Is right and wrong objective, or is it wholly subjective? I think there are questions in the philosophical sense that are much more difficult to answer. I've always said the NAP deals in the realm of pragmatism and what's actually going on in reality between individuals. Now we can have a discussion about whether or not a certain action is morally right or morally wrong in a religious or philosophical sense, and probably have a really long argument with both of us having a very difficult time convincing the other person of our respective position. And I'm not saying there's no value in those kinds of discussions, but I'd say for what the way I defend the nap is essentially take the position might. Suppose someone says, I believe might makes right. So long as you are strong enough to get away with something, actions do not require justification. So if I initiate force against you and I'm strong enough to get away with it, I don't have to justify my actions, and you don't have to either. Now they can claim to believe that. They can be perfectly. There's nothing logically incoherent about that position. It can principally be applied universally, but in a practical sense, we see anyone who claims to believe this, the moment the gun is turned against, suddenly when someone stronger than them comes along and wants to initiate force against them, suddenly they turn back on what they just said, and now all of a sudden the other person has a moral obligation not to harm them. So we can argue whether or not, we can argue about the objective nature of right and wrong, and that certainly is a discussion to be had, but practically speaking, the only position anyone can consistently live out is I would say the non-aggression principle is the only, that's the only position that can be consistently lived out, because anyone else will inevitably at some point, regardless of what they claim, they'll end up what it comes down to is them claiming that I have the right to initiate force, but no one else does, and they'll never be able to give a consistent justification for that.
Well, I would actually argue that the argument might makes right is actually necessarily it's actually contradictory in itself, in terms of, I don't mean as in you couldn't do it. I mean as in terms of, because of the nature of basically what forming an argument is, it's necessarily contradictory with that. So I'd actually argue that's actually where I'd argue that it doesn't even work as you can apply consistently technically, but the reason why you can weed it out is because of merely that if you try to justify it, I don't mean do it, I mean literally justify it, you'll fall into a formative contradiction. So in fact, that's, I think, sort of what, I guess I'll give you a very brief rundown of my own morality. So I hold that anyone can pretty much hold any moral beliefs, but that only a certain set of them can be justified, and that they have to be consistent with basic norms of an argument, which is, and I do presuppose that there are in fact some, such as my position is the truth, my opponent are trying to arrive at the truth. I'm not going to go into all of them because that would require like several hours of elaboration, but that's the core principle, that if it's a contradiction with an argument, it's justifiable.
Okay. I think I follow where you're going with that, but again, I'd say that I still don't. That would still, when we're talking about arguments, in order for an argument to take place, both parties would have to act on the assumption that each of them bears the burden of proof in whatever argument they're making. If someone genuinely believed that might makes right, it seems to me that their conviction would be that actions do not require justification or argument. Now, strictly speaking, the statement actions do not require justification, there's nothing logically incoherent about that statement. It seems it could be true, it could be consistently applied. So in a strict, if someone asked me, can you prove that the aggressor bears the burden of proof to justify his actions solely on a basis of logic and reason alone, without any appeals to practicality, I would have to say no. I don't see anything inconsistent about saying might makes right, but I do see that in practical terms, no one can actually live this way. They inevitably, regardless of what they claim to believe, they inevitably claim that other people have the requirement to justify their own actions, which makes them, even if their position itself isn't inconsistent, they can't consistently live with what they claim to believe, and therefore that their position can't be true. I guess my question to you would be, if that's the stance you're taking, how do you solely on the basis of reason alone justify argument itself and the premise that an individual bears the burden of proof to justify their actions. Why couldn't they take the position actions do not require justification?
Well, technically, in a sense of, technically you could enact, technically you could engage in, you could basically use, so for example, something like might make right. You could say, well, I don't have to justify it. So, and then just do it. I mean, technically, no, your action doesn't technically need justification in that sense, but that if you're going to try to argue that my action is basically an ethical one, no, you necessarily cannot. That's where I hold it. It's not a matter of whether, I can do my actions, whether or not your action is in self consistently justifiable. And I'd argue, yes, there are certain actions which just cannot be as such.
I think, yeah, I think if I'm understanding what you're trying to get at is, you can claim that your actions do not need justification, but then you can't then claim that other people need to justify their actions.
Well, if you subscribe to the belief, if you personally commit to the belief actions don't need justification, that means I could also go ahead. That means I could also use an action against you without any justification as well. So, in that sense.
That's exactly what I'm saying. And I'm saying the position itself is not internally contradictory. In principle, such a view could be lived out consistently, but practically we see that no one can live that out consistently. They can claim that they believe that, but then the moment someone initiates force against them, suddenly they're claiming that that person has an obligation to justify their actions, which shows that, well, they claim to believe that, their actions prove that they don't really believe that, and actions speak louder than words.
Sorry.
Well, yeah.
True.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I had to do that.
No, I guess maybe I didn't phrase it the best way, but my case, though, is if you're going to try to argumentatively justify any ethical system, that there are going to be certain propositions like might makes right, which will create a performative contradiction, which means it's not inherently justifiable. It doesn't mean does not mean itself you cannot go ahead and do it. It means that if you're trying to establish it as an ethical principle, it's not consistent with basic tenets of argument.
Okay. I think you're going. That sounds something along the line of argumentative ethics. Then, I guess I'm just struggling to. I'm not quite sure where the disagreement between you and I is then, because that doesn't. I don't see how that contradicts anything I just said.
No, it probably doesn't. I don't think it does, actually.
Saying the same thing, just different words.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, right.
And I'm just.
I don't know what I'm talking. I think you probably know what I'm talking about, though.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I've Hans Hermann Hoppe has made the argumentative ethics popular. I've read at least 2 papers that I know of on it. One by Hoppe in favor of argumentative ethics, one in response, and then another by one of Hoppe's students in response. So it actually what you're talking about, we're certainly not going to settle this discussion in this live stream. There even between very high profile libertarians, there are some very deep disagreements on just how far argumentative ethics goes, which is why I've always said, I like having such conversations, but I found that in the real realm of discussion, it's more helpful to appeal to the fact that no one can. It's easier to show that someone can't consistently live with what they claim to believe than to try to argue in the wholly abstract sense about morality and ethics on the basis of what, in deontologically speaking, what makes an act right or wrong. That's going to be a. I mean, in the purely abstract, that discussion will last for hours. But if you bring it to the practical, real world level, you'll show very quickly that people can claim to believe certain things, and their beliefs might not be internally inconsistent, but actions speak louder than words, and their actions will always show what they really believe.
Okay.
And let's be real, you can't also have that right now just because of the fact that we're on a stupid live stream and don't have notebooks and notebooks of evidence right in front of us as if we're going to do a debate.
I guess I'll ask one question. So, what's your view of, I guess, what I would call punishment, self-defense, restitution, that sort of thing? So, So, like for example, if someone comes to like rob your house, they attack you. So, how far can you go with restitutional force? Can you merely go as far as to get them off your property, knock them off, or can you now say, well, okay, you attempted to try to rob me, so now I can go rob you as well because because you yourself have committed to that action. I mean, what's your view
Yes,
of?
but that's also going to lead to chaos.
Well, I would say the guiding principle is you're only justified in using the proportionate amount of force to correct the aggression. Now, the kicker here is that the immediate follow-on question is, well, how much force is enough in each individual case? Now, I think that is more difficult to determine, but the guiding principle would be if somebody is trespassing on my property, I'm first, and I don't want him there, I'm first only justified in saying, excuse me, could you please leave my property? If he does, no harm done. If he refuses, then would be justified in using the level of physical force necessary to remove him from my property. Now, if he robs me, I'm justified in seeking damages either to return my stolen property or return the equivalent amount of money. And of course, the question always says, well, if he's actually physically assaulting you and it's in self-defense, then are you justified in using lethal force? Are you justified in using, your fists? What is the escalation of force? And I would say in that case, again, the guiding principle is you're only justified in using the proportionate amount of force necessary to correct the violation. But anyone who's ever been in a life or death combat situation like that will tell you you only have seconds to make a decision that can mean life or death. And in this case, if the burden of proof, if I would say the person being assaulted, if this were to go to a private court after the fact, if the aggressor wants to argue that the person defending himself used excessive force, the burden of proof is going to be on him, not on the person defending themselves, since he was the one who initiated force in the first place.
His attorney would say something, though.
I think it would be probably contextual, so it would depend on every single circumstance of what was actually happening, because there might be some cases where you have to go from, trying to like just tell them to, get off my property to having to put a bullet in their head. It really depends on the situation you're dealing with. I don't think it'll go always that far, but yes, I would actually argue if someone is trespassing on your property and you try telling them to get off, you've threatened them, you've fired a warning shot, and they still won't get off. I would argue if you've tried every possible thing, you can, in fact, just kill them. So,
and I think that there's actually a legal doctrine in several states called castle doctrine. And essentially what it is if you are inside your house and your house is locked and someone breaks the lock and enters your home, no matter what the circumstances, if you shoot and kill that person, you cannot be legally held. You cannot be prosecuted for that. And the legal justification is you were in your rightfully owned property and the doors were locked. Therefore, if the other person is going to try to argue that you used excessive force, the burden of proof is on him because he was trespassing. But not only was he trespassing, he actually had to break a lock, break down measures you put in place to keep him out in order to get inside. So I would say that the principle is still the same. It's in the purely abstract sense, you are only justified in using the minimum amount of force. But obviously, we live in a world of we don't live in a world of precision. We live in a world where the actions happening, the person defending himself only has seconds to make a decision that can mean life or death. And if the aggressor was wrongfully on the property, trespassing, in the case of castle doctrine, broke the lock to get inside, then I would say the burden of proof would be on him to prove that the person defending himself used excessive force, not on the person defending himself to prove that his action were justified.
I'm gonna.
I kind of have a little bit of a kind of joke question, but so what if a guy was trying to sneak into his girlfriend's house, but the father didn't know, so he basically threatened the kid, and maybe let's say, for example, because he didn't leave, he basically shot the kid or whatnot. Would that be an act of too much? Even though, he's sneaking into his house and the father didn't know.
The most you could do is wake him up, tell him to get out of the house, and then you go up from there until he's off the house. You cannot just shoot him when he comes over. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think probably what's important to note is it also the context really is important with how much force is reasonable. If someone say on a section, like say I own a sectioned off piece of land that I have livestock on. If I see someone coming through like wearing a backpack, I'm like my immediate assumption would be, okay, they're a lost backpacker. So I'm not going to come out there with a rifle and start shooting at them. Whereas if someone comes in with a bag and a rifle, I assume they're there to steal my livestock. So then I would be, even if that wasn't necessarily true, why would you trespass on someone's paddock with a bag and a rifle if you're not there to steal livestock? So I think you need to have a justification with how much force you use, but in most circumstances, if you're in a self-defense, that would be really easy to prove. If someone comes down if someone comes down a dark alleyway wielding a machete at you and you shoot them, well, they were wielding a machete. Therefore, it's self-defense. That would be really easy to prove.
Well, sure. So I want to present. So I think I'm going to take a variation of a scenario I've seen. Suppose person A basically knocks out person B really badly, then person A throws person B on someone else's property, but then of course person C wants them off, but that if they throw them off the property, they're going to die immediately. And it's not like it's a oh no, very little chance. It's like if I throw them out in the street, they're going to get run over. So, or something like that. So in that case, would person C be justified in throwing them off the property, even though person B is going to be immediately killed?
So wait,
I think no, because it's not the fault of person B that they're trespassing. They were thrown onto person C's property by person A, so it's technically person A's trespassing.
Person A is not present.
Actually, if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to alter the scenario just a little bit, because I think and if you disagree with this alteration, then let me know. But I think this will hit the point home a little bit more forcefully. Suppose person A owns a private plane. Person B has been person B assaults person C, ties him up, and without person A's knowledge, throws person C onto the private plane into the cargo bay or something. The plane takes off, and in the course of the flight, person A finds person C, who is against his will been put onto person A's property. Now, person A did not tell person C that he has the right to be there, but person B, violated person C's rights, putting him onto person A's plane. Suppose person A then says, you have no right to be on my property, and throws him out of the plane, knowing that he's going to fall to his death. And then would person A be justified in saying, look, he had no right to be on my property, and it's not my fault he couldn't fly?
My question is the fact that why would someone just jump straight to conclusion that you're not supposed to be on here, grab you and go, and not ask, what the hell are you doing?
Well, they're presumably
you could be pissed off, but why are you jumping immediately to the guy picking him up and throwing him off the plane?
But quickly, Pacna, would you agree that that's what you were getting at with your original scenario?
There's a related issue I don't want to go into here because that would be a giant rabbit hole, and I think that's different. That's what I'm getting at the scenario.
Okay, yeah. My point would be in that case, if person C is not was put onto person A's property against his will, so it may be an inconvenience to person A to keep him on the plane until the plane lands. But again, I would have to ask, if the tables were turned, if person A wants to claim that he's justified in throwing person C off his plane and it's not his fault if he couldn't fly, well, I highly doubt that person A, if he were in the same situation, would say that, suppose it's him who's been thrown on somebody else's plane, is he really going to be okay with that plane owner saying, look, I know you didn't try to violate my property rights, but you're trespassing on my property, get out, it's not my fault you can't fly. I don't think he's going to be okay with that either. So I don't think person A can consistently justify why it's okay when he does it, but it's not okay if somebody else does it to him.
Well, I think the difficulty that I'm seeing in the scenario is so when person A throws off, I think it's person C, are they actually murdering them, or is person C's death just a consequence of being thrown off? There's a big difference there.
Well, if he's actively throwing him off the plane, that's
he's
basically killing him.
He's making a conscious choice to put them in danger, and they know they don't. Because did he give him a parachute first? Mind you, I think a conscious choice should come into this, because it's not person C's choice to be on that plane. Like, they've been assaulted and tied up, so they're not actually taking any action here.
Right.
They're the passive party in this.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have they can't make. I would say in legal terms, they can't make an action because their free will has been taken from them by person B because they've been assaulted and tied up.
Though the free will hasn't been totally
not be considered an actor in this. They should be considered the passive party. Therefore, it's person A needs to make a successful justification for putting them in mortal danger by throwing them out of the plane.
Well, I think the only way they could. So, presumably, this is a person who hasn't lost their consciousness and free will permanently, as in they're not like completely the brain isn't so destroyed that from the unconscious event. So, presumably, we're talking about that kind of person who still has free will, but they can't exercise it right now.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like in this specific situation, like the person who's tied up shouldn't be considered being able to make choices because they're impaired in some fashion. Temporary as that might be.
Well, and I think it's what we get here is throwing him out of the plane is an active action that directly leads to his death. I don't think you can separate the action. I didn't kill him. I just threw off the plane, and it's not my fault he couldn't fly. Well, imagine I walk into a bedroom where there's a sleeping person, and I put a pillow over his face and suffocate him to death, and say I didn't kill him. All I did was put a pillow over his face. It's not my fault that he can't survive without oxygen. I mean,
I didn't murder him. I just pulled the trigger.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I don't know if that quite works though, because when you're smothering them to death with a pill, there's clearly an intention there of trying to, kill them. Whereas throwing them off, I mean, that's what I'm getting at. Is the intention?
My point is, I don't think there's a meaningful difference because the person holding the pillow over his face could claim he could easily claim it was not my intent to kill him. It was only my intent to hold a pillow over his face. It's not my fault that he couldn't live without oxygen. In the same way, the person can on the plane can claim it was not my intent to kill him. It was just my intent to get him off the plane. It's not my fault he couldn't fly. Well, obviously, he had full knowledge that by throwing him out of the plane without a parachute, he would die. There's no way person A did not know that it would kill him to do that, and yet he chose to take the action anyways. So I don't see how trying to separate the two is any different from saying it's not my intention to kill him, it's just my intention to hold the pillow over his face.
Okay, I've got a scenario. I've actually got a scenario based on just that one. One person wants, let's say it's one of those things where you have a cancer patient who is in a lot of pain, and they want you to pull the plug. I mean, do they have the right to do that to themselves and ask you to do it? Do they have the right? I mean, or should you not pull the plug and reject that? I mean, or do they have the right to basically euthanasia themselves? Is that a violation of the NAP?
I would say that's
basically if euthanasia is okay, if that's the right word, right?
Euthanasia is the correct word. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I mean, it makes no sense that suicide in general would be a violation because I think this is basically getting into the should suicide be legal argument. How do you make suicide illegal?
Yeah, exactly. You can say suicide's illegal, but once the person does it, what are you going to do? They're dead. So
make sure no one else can do it.
It's not really suicide. It's basically asking somebody else to kind of put you out of their misery or something like that.
Okay,
they're consenting to being killed, so yeah, you can because they've consented to dying. I would argue you are committing yourself to any actions you consent to. Granted that you are consenting to the given action.
I have a scenario then. What about let's add more context to the situation then. Let's say a 14-year-old cancer patient is going through a lot of pain and it has to be at the hospital all the time, has no friends and whatnot, and has barely any life other than being in the hospital, hooked up all the time, and has a lot of pain. The parents wants the kid, of course, to survive and live, but the kid doesn't want to keep doing this anymore. So does the kid asking for it, does that have enough justification for the doctor to do it, even though the parents say, no, I want my child to live, even though she's living through pain every day?
Well, I hold that parents cannot own children. A child can revoke their trustee relationship anytime with a parent that they want to. So I would say that they would have to real consequences of dying is, and if they do know that and they can reasonably demonstrate that to, I guess, doctor or whoever it is, yes, they have the right to do it themselves. The parent has no say over it.
Okay. If I could quick add, here's one point. I'm not actually going to weigh in at this point. I just want to add one point here to the discussion. It is the case that many people who attempt suicide felt very strong in their conviction that they wanted to die, but the moment the noose is around their neck and they're choking, suddenly, oh crap, I don't want to die anymore. So they pull it off. And you know, in some tragic cases, the way they've chosen to commit suicide is irreversible. But in some cases where they're trying to kill themselves, when the pain of dying begins, suddenly they no longer wish to do it and they try to stop. That does in fact happen. So the question should be asked, it may be the case that someone feels genuine in their conviction that they wish to end their own life. But now if it's doctor-assisted suicide, not the person, but the doctor who's going to end their life, the question has to at least be in the back of the doctor's mind. What if, as I start to end their life, they suddenly don't want to do it anymore? Will they be able to communicate that? And will there be time to actually stop? Or will they attempt to withdraw consent, and then you're now killing them against their will?
No, I would argue at that point, once you've committed to the action, you can't. Once the consequences of an action have begun and you've okayed it, you can't withdraw because you don't like the consequences.
And unfortunately, as you stated, there's yes, technically at some point you would be going against it, but there's kind of like, as you're saying, you made that choice, and unfortunately, with things like life or death or something like that, you don't have enough time for the doctor to react to stop doing it because the damage has already been done to your body.
Okay, now, and the point here being, I have heard many doctors say, regardless of whether or not you want to say whether or not euthanasia is principally ethical, many doctors will say, I simply won't do it because I don't believe a person truly can consent to their own death. I think once any person, if they have sound mind, once the death begins, they will seek to withdraw consent. Therefore, I'm just going to say, personally speaking, I could not bring myself to be the agent who would end a person's life. If they end their life by their own hand, that's one thing. If they say, I consent to you ending my life, that is not something I would ever be comfortable doing.
Well, that's a different
no doctor would have the obligation to end someone's life if they are. And I would add something, if someone's in extreme pain, they can be very delirious. So I would say the doctor has the right to say, no, you're delirious because of pain, I'm going to give you morphine and wait for you to calm down.
Yeah, the doctor has a say in it as well because he would be the one committing the action. And even if the person gives consent, the doctor doing it can say, no, I'm not going to do that because you're just delirious or in pain or something else like that. The doctor can choose whether not to or not.
Yep, that's what I was about to say. It's between both. If the patient wants it and the doctor's okay with doing it. Yeah, it's obviously both.
Mind you, to get back to the 14-year-old thing, if the parents want them to be in a specific hospital and the doctor comes over and says, no, he needs to be at this hospital in the children's ward where we can properly treat them and they can be sociable with other kids in the situation so they don't get extremely lonely and depressed, I think the doctor in that situation, because he is essentially acting as the expert in this position, would be able to override the parents' desires.
The parents don't like it.
Exactly, because he is using his medical knowledge and the knowledge of his knowledge to essentially make a decision, make a point that this would be in the best interest of the child.
One thing I kind of want to add into a point, because we obviously can't do this right now. If we're going to have like a real full discussion on this, we would probably need to do research on what like kids actually who have gone through this, whether they live either a happy life and they've gone through this horrible stuff and by the end they're much happier and whatnot, or do they still live through hell even if they don't have like this disease or whatnot in them anymore that made them want to do it. We would have to do research in that, but obviously we can't do that right now Because that's something that definitely a factor to take in consideration. Those who did go through it, even though they may not fully have liked to do it during the time, by the end, they would say that they came out, they're happy lives now, basically what I'm saying.
All right. I think this is we've kind of. Is there any more points you want to bring up about it? Because I think I've got a scenario about the application of a map in a real world sense, not just a purely abstract one.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. I think we've exhausted this particular line of thought.
It's not really here about the nap, but suppose person A steals person B's car, and then they sell to person C, and person C doesn't know that the car was stolen, and then person B finds person C and basically demands that they re-give them the car. Person B rightfully, in their minds, rightfully bought it. How would you apply it in that situation?
I think person C should get his money back.
Yeah, person C
the person A gets his car.
Yeah, the person who stole the vehicle is the original action. Yeah, so if you steal a vehicle and then sell it to somebody else, that somebody else should not pay the price for your crime, essentially. So you would be the one who would have to supply the refund and make sure the car is returned in the state it was when you took it.
Now, I'm just going to say for the record, if I was person C and I later learned it was a stolen vehicle, I might personally feel compelled to give the vehicle back to the original owner and then ask that I be compensated my money back. But I would say at the very least, if you bought a stolen item not knowing it was stolen, the person who stole it has an obligation to compensate person A, not the unwilling participant who did not knowing who to his knowledge only rightfully purchased something not knowing it was stolen.
That was a good real world example.
No kidding.
Sorry. So, do we have anything else to add on that, or do we want to kind of get out of the philosophical world?
Okay, no. Honestly, this has been a really good discussion. If you guys want to keep this up for the rest of the time, that's great. But we have been going 42 minutes, so if there are any other topics anyone wants to address, might want to bring those up.
Did I get an answer about the suing thing?
Go ahead, Scorch.
Oh, I was wondering, did we ever get an answer to if you can sue someone for slander? Because we kind of trailed off on that.
Yeah. I think to get back to that, I think the burden of is what you actually want to happen if you believe someone has slandered you. You want them to either retract their statement or shut up or whatever. So I think the burden of proof is on you to prove two things. First, that they knew it was going to cause damage to you, and therefore they did it anyway. So it's, they knew that it was going to cause So say somebody, person A claims person B raped someone. Person B has the burden to say, okay, person A knew it was going to cause me damage and did it anyway. Therefore, it was a knowing, malicious act, and therefore they should be forced to retract it.
Mm-hmm. And I think, Pipsqueak, I think you bring up an important point. Like, even under current law, when it comes to libel and deliberately slandering someone, the difficult part is, in order for someone to be convicted, currently, in order for somebody to be convicted under the libel laws, you have to prove that the person knowingly made false statements about you. And that's usually very difficult to prove. It always could be the case. And oftentimes, like, for example, in my video response to Alyssa Milano, I talked about the how feminists will often claim only 2% of rape accusations are false, and obviously the data shows that that can't possibly be true, because in at least 25% of cases, DNA evidence proves that the person accused did not commit the crime. Well, when you prove the person accused didn't commit the crime, the person who's making the accusation can always claim, oh, well, I guess it was someone else, and I just mistook it for him. Or perhaps you could claim it was a false memory of some sort, false memory disorder, proving that the other person maliciously and knowingly lied is usually a very difficult thing to prove.
One thing I want to say in terms of like that rape accusation, you could say, when you're in that kind of state, you're not thinking very clearly, and a lot of times you only a lot of times you don't really get to see their face like very often, or you don't want to look at it and whatnot. And after the fact happens, you don't want to remember of what had happened. All you really want to do when you get home is take a shower or something like that. So you don't really have either A, the most clearest mind right now, or B, you didn't see them very well, or 3, because you're in such a panic state, you're trying to think of who could have actually done it or something like that. So that's just one point I want to add into there.
But again, I guess to answer your question, Scorch, my opinion, yes, in virtue of the fact that if you deliberately slander someone with the intention of harming them in some way, that's the active position. You would have to justify why everyone can slander everyone else, or why you and you alone can slander someone else. I don't think anyone is willing to live with the consequences of everyone can justly slander everyone else. Therefore, they would have to say their actions would prove that somehow what they're trying to argue is that they and they alone have the right to slander others, and you could never consistently justify that you and you alone have the right to slander others.
My kind of question is the fact that, like, let's say, for example, someone did a false rape accusation against someone, and they went to jail for a while, but then it turns out it actually wasn't, so they got out. How does that person get how does someone get like their justice for it? That person just goes to jail for that same amount of time? And the thing that's hard is the fact that not only do they go to jail a lot, but they can have their reputations ruined for the rest of their lives. And even though it has been completely cleared up and whatnot, people still have in their head that, oh, this person did that, because it could go like wildfire. How could someone get justice for what has been done to them?
I would probably say a private arbitration would determine like a rightful amount of restitution for that, but I would argue the victim can do exactly the same as what was done to them. So they could throw the victim in jail. They could also ruin them as well. So it's exactly whatever was done to them. But a private arbitrator could also give other options if maybe they want financial compensation, or maybe some form of like, for this amount of time, you have to compensate them for damages for this long, or something like that.
Yeah, but the thing that's hard is the fact that your reputation is the thing that's ruined. So say, for example, you just got out of prison, so you're trying to find a new job, but because your name was spread around about this, that you did this, even though it was cleared up, people will still have that in their heads. So it may be like really hard to find a job. Most women aren't going to trust you anymore, or something along those lines.
Yeah, but I think, Mag, the problem is that's too sufficiently subjective for any kind of formal restitution. Now, if for example, suppose the person claims, because my reputation is ruined, no one's ever going to hire me again, I need a way to make a living. Well, then a private arbitration could rule, the false accuser has to pay them a salary for the rest of their life in order to compensate for the fact that they've ruined their ability to never get a job. But as for my reputation is ruined, people believe I did it, unfortunately, that's too subjective for there to be a formal restitution for that specifically.
True.
I think realistic in that sense, the only, if I were a judge arbitrating on a case like this, all right, you spread misinformation about this, you then have to take reasonable steps in order to rectify it. So all the places that you spread information, you are now obligated to go and correct that information. So I think anything more than that would either be unreasonable or unenforceable.
All right. Well, we're at 50 minutes. Got about 10 minutes left, although I will let this go longer if we're having good conversation. On that note,
oh, sorry, what?
Go ahead, Mag. Finish.
No, I'm just gonna state this, that out of like a lot of live streams I've been on, especially for like with the ones that were talking about all philosophical and whatnot, I love those live streams, and this has to be like one of my funnest ones I've been on for a while. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, good conversation. Definitely.
Yeah, it was actually quite fun to listen to.
I guess I'll pry with one more question. So, when does an individual, I guess, acquire their self-ownership and their contract right? So, when would you say they would acquire that? By merely being born? Do they acquire it at conception? When do you hold they actually acquire that?
The self-ownership, I believe, begins at conception, because DNA shows that the unique individual.
And I would say in my my series Abortion Libertarianism, I would argue it begins at conception, because I believe self-ownership is grounded in your natural capacities, not your current capacities. Basically, anyone who's going to argue that self-ownership is not inherent to existing as a human being inevitably, you're going to have to argue that it is attained at some other point in life. And you're going to have to be prepared to demonstrate, okay, if it's attained, what specifically causes you to attain it and why. And like as I anyone I know of, and obviously this is my opinion. If someone wants to dispute me on this, I'd be willing to have the discussion. But it's my opinion. Anyone who tries to argue you do not attain self-ownership until point X, after a series of argumentation, you'll show that can't, whatever they're claiming grounds self-ownership can't be. They can't consistently apply it. Which is why I would say many, if not most, primary arguments for abortion being justified because fetus does not have self-ownership work equally as well to justify killing infants and children. Almost everyone willing to make those arguments is unwilling to say that you're justified in killing infants and children. Well, therefore, they're being inconsistent, and that can't be what they really believe.
Okay, so all right. What about okay, do you hold that children can actually consent to contracts? Do they acquire? I mean, my view about children rights is that they can acquire contractual rights as they develop and understand them. They can acquire them rather than acquire them all at once. How do you view children's rights in this sense?
If they understand what they're getting into, and if they can understand what they're getting into and understand what the thing is, I think that they could. But again, I think that has to come with when you're really young, you don't understand everything about the world, and you don't understand a lot about consequences, and you don't understand everything that you're getting into. So if someone say for example, you're a kid and someone hands you a piece of paper saying you will be my slave if you sign this, they don't really understand everything that's going to go on, so they may sign it, even though they don't realize what problems that's going to come up with in the future.
Yeah, at that point, they kind of fall into their parents' protection. At least that's the way I would see that going down.
My question is, when does that stop? What point would kids kind of get to either an age or they have enough mentality to understand what that's going on around them?
Okay,
probably 16. Probably 16.
I don't think there's that age for that.
Okay, what if I could chime in quick? I think what the parent-child relationship is something we see grounded in nature. Nature is running its course by children being born, being raised by their parents, having their parents make decisions for them for their own good for a certain time, and then at some point when they've reached a level of maturity, breaking away from their parents and living as adults. I think trying to set arbitrary age limits is difficult, and if not impossible, because certain people mature faster than others. Here's where I have a lot more respect for ancient cultures that rather than having a age, essentially, whether it was 16, whether it was 18, you were a child and now you're an adult. In a lot of ancient cultures, they essentially had rites of passage where whatever hunt, conducting their own hunt, going to battle with the army, and you can look at all these different cultures, and they had lots of different rites of passage. I'm not going to say all of them were ethical, but what they understood was when the child declared that they were ready to partake in that rite of passage and demonstrate that they were capable of living on their own as an adult, at that point they would be allowed to live as an adult. So I would say it's more about the child can demonstrate at what point they have the capacity to live without their parents' assistance any longer. Not to say it would be easy to establish an objective rite of passage, but I think there was value in that as opposed to just having an arbitrary age.
I agree with that, and to kind of also answer how you would do that, let's say for nowadays, how would you do something like that? Let's say, for example, we had a mentality test, and you got to see how much, because if you a lot of kids go under IQ test and whatnot, but that doesn't really compute to the same way of what a mentality test would be, which would be testing your understanding of how you can comprehend a lot of things. And if you have a high mentality, or your mentality would be of an older age, that means you can understand and comprehend a lot of things as would an adult, even if you're 13 or something because you've studied a lot of stuff. I'm not going to go into logistics of that.
Okay,
one,
but anyways, Mag, I just want.
I'm blabbling.
I see what you're saying, Mag, but I'm thinking more not a intellectual test, but a test of, like, take, for example, a standard Native American rite of passage. A young boy, when he's ready, his father teaches him how to hunt and provide for his family. When he's ready, he goes on his own and completes his own hunt. Now, I don't know if I'm wrongly attributing that to Native Americans. I know it was at least a similar practice in some ancient cultures. By going and completing a hunt on his own, he's showing that he no longer needs his father's help to provide for himself and for his future family. I would say in our modern age, the rite of passage would be choosing to leave the parents' house, get a job, and get their own place to live, be that by renting or buying their own property. I feel like that would be more of a rite of passage, not taking some kind of test to demonstrate their IQ level.
The problem with that is the fact that a lot of young adults nowadays live with their parents while they're still in college and whatnot, are trying to get a good stable job and whatnot. So they'll live with their parents and either paying rent or they're doing college things. Maybe they won't. It depends on the relationship with their parents. But a lot of young adults still live with their parents. So where does that go into?
Well, I guess it wouldn't necessarily make them not an adult, but if they're living with their parents, then they're living on property owned by their parents, and it would still be even if their parents consider them to be adults, their parents could justly have rules for them to follow in virtue of the fact that they're living on property owned by their parents.
Well, you can also say that for also apartments, they have rules as well, but I get your point.
My question though is, so when does I guess you could say a child, or you could say even younger than a child. So when do they acquire what you could call the most basic trust, basically just trustee rights, as in they can decide, okay, I want to live under this parent, or no, I'm going to run away because I don't like the way they've been treating me, so I'm going to revoke my trustee rights, and then basically find a different trustee that I can actually consent to.
I wouldn't use the word when. Sorry.
When do trustee rights come into? When does a child actually have
the word when, but it would have to be if you understand what you're getting into, for the argument of running away because you live in a horrible house right now. Do you understand the hardship that you're going to have to go through if you are going to run away, and if your home environment is really that bad, and you properly okay, I have a backpack with food and whatnot, and I have a place to where I'm going to go and whatnot. Basically, you understand what you're getting into, and you prepared for it, and you thought about it. And if you can comprehend what you're going to do, then I would say it's not really when, but if you can comprehend and understand the consequences of what you're going to do, but still do it anyway. If you really can't, then not.
That's what I think is more about, is understanding and comprehending the consequences of your actions.
And another question I have is, at any point do the parents own the child as of even, or like an infant, as property? At any point can it be considered that kind of property or not?
No.
It's not so much ownership, no. It's more
I would say trusted ownership more so than property. Property implies you could do whatever you want to it.
Yeah.
And I don't think they can violate the child's right to life.
And you think that's true even right when it comes right out of the womb? I mean,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, also I'm just going to say this for keep in mind your wording. That would be basically saying to where, let's say, for example, at 4 years old, you are the property of the child. They can't comprehend a lot of stuff as well, or they don't have a large understanding of the world. So they're basically the parents' property. If they were their property, they could do whatever they want to it. That means they can molest their 4-year-old kid. So either be aware of your wording and rephrase it, or what are you trying to say?
Okay, and I want to make one point here. Now, I think it's sometimes helpful to step out of the world of abstraction for a minute and think about what you're talking about. I mean, who of us in our right mind would think it's natural for a parent not to want to care for their child? I mean, nature itself shows us that is how the species propagates itself, and it's how we all would not be functioning adults today were it not for either our parents or someone who took the role of our parents. So
I'm going to disagree with you. I'm going to disagree with you just because of the fact that there are a lot of parents that either they accidentally had a kid and they have to live with that, or they realize when they get older that they really didn't actually want to have kids and they treat them like garbage and whatnot. So
it's more the average. That's just kind of more the average. Yes, there are.
I'm not saying there are no cases, Meg. I'm saying that we see in nature that this is how it's supposed to work. We consider it abnormal. Like when you look at someone and say that person is a bad parent, the fact that you said they are a bad parent shows that you implicitly understand there was a way they were supposed to parent and they failed to do it.
True.
Yeah. So wait a minute. Are you basically suggesting? I'm trying to get from this. So you're basically suggesting that a parent is obligated to take care of their child for a certain point of time.
I would say, and if they are unwilling to do so, then I would say they can pass that obligation on to someone else who is willing to do so. But yes, I would say that's a relationship that is grounded in nature.
One thing I want to say to where it's defending you is the fact that, let's say, for example, a lot of women or mothers, when they either before they have a kid or after it, they have a natural instinct to take care of things, so they do want to nurture and take care and love their child, because that's something that's an instinctive that they've had for like thousands of years. So that's just a point I want to prove with that.
Okay, so you mentioned that, my two cents, you basically mentioned that a parent doesn't want to take care of the child, that they can hand over the rights to someone else, right? That's what you're saying?
I would say so.
Okay, do you believe that a parent can just outright abandon the baby, and then allow it to just wither and die if they just decide I don't want to take care of it anymore?
I would
abandon it.
I would not agree with that. No, I would say they have an obligation to provide for the child. If by handing over their obligations to someone who's willingly able to take on those obligations, they are caring for the child. But I would say just abandoning, they would be circumventing they would be abandoning their responsibility to the child. And again, we see in nature, if you choose to have sex, there is you implicitly know there's a possibility that children will result, and that natural relationship will be ensued. And I think a parent saying, I never wanted to have kids, therefore I don't have a responsibility to care for my kids, is along the lines of someone saying, I'd never intended, I was texting and driving, but I got in a car accident. It wasn't my intention to get in the car accident, though. It was just my intent to text and drive. You took an action. Your action directly led to a result. You now have an obligation.
Yeah. One thing I want to say is also to where we were talking about how kids have like human rights to, like, say, for example, to not be killed and whatnot, either in the womb or afterwards when they're infants. So if you're choosing, if you know what you're doing is going to lead to this child's death, which is, say, for example, it's really cold and you leave it out in the blizzard and whatnot, you're actively choosing to kill the child. So that would be violating its natural rights to live. Now, if you gave it to like a grandfather, a uncle, a best friend, or on a church lot, on a fire station, something like that, that's you giving the rights to someone else so they can take care of it, but that's not you and your intention of you're trying to kill the baby.
Well, I would say with the winner scenario, I think there's a difference between just leaving it out and then it dies due to natural circumstances, then like grabbing a brick and then bashing its skull. And there's a big difference. So the latter, I would definitely consider the murder. The former, I would just consider choosing not to, because I'm not obligated to provide. So I'll just say this, I don't want to go down. There is a related issue you're talking about, which is abortion. I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole, and I've kind of already written my view on it and a few of my 2 cents pages. But I don't think that a parent is in fact obligated to take care of a child. I think they can abandon it at any time that they want to, because as part of the trustee relationship, they can choose, okay, I am consenting. I don't want to take care of it anymore. So I believe that they can abandon their ownership of the infant. That's what I don't think they are obligated.
Does not mean the life, though. So, say for example, you abandon it, but it depends on where you're abandoning. Are you abandoning it on a church lot or fire station or at a family's house, or are you abandoning it in the middle of a forest, middle of a field?
Well, hang on, Mag. I think that's a separate issue, Mag. Let me put it like this. I think I'm going to use another scenario that I think will hit the point home more so. Suppose I'm walking along the street and I see a man who clearly has been attacked and is bleeding to death. Now I am I was not there whenever that happened. I did not witness it. I am not in any way responsible for the condition he is currently in. Now, I still think if I'm a decent person, I'm going to call 911 and try to get that person help. But assuming I just walk by and do nothing to help him, you cannot say I am responsible for his death. I simply choosing not to save him is not the same as actively killing him. However, if you are directly responsible for putting him in his imperiled condition, then yes, you do have an obligation. Like, suppose I beat him up and he's bleeding there dying, and then I just say, look, it was not my intent for him to die. It was just my intent to beat him up. I'm simply, I wanted him to live. But once the beating is over and now he's bleeding to death, I'm just choosing to let nature take its course and let him die. That's kind of, I think, much in the same way when people say, I am choosing to have sex, but I'm not. I consent to having sex, but I don't consent to having children. That's as ridiculous as saying I consent to buying a winning lottery ticket, or I consent to having sex, but not to getting an STD. You can't consent to the one, but not the other. The latter is the logical consequence of your decision. If you choose to have sex and you conceive, you have now brought a human being into existence. You've placed him in an imperiled condition where he has no choice but to depend on you in order to survive. Therefore, much like you beating the person and he's about to die, you are directly responsible for placing the child into their imperiled condition, and thus have an obligation to either care for them or care for them by passing on those obligations to someone else. That would be my position.
That's why I said that the child isn't a person of their own fully to understand and take control of their life until they understand consequences of their actions. Because your actions do have consequences, and you must take responsibility for some actions.
Well, what was I going to say? So, no, I think my view on that is that no, I don't. I do actually. I would say an infant like right out of the womb. I actually would say that it's legitimate property of either of the parents, and that once the infant can get to a point where it can basically say no in a sense, it can revoke its trustee. That's at the point where I believe it falls out of the category of what you call property, and it falls into the category of a free-willing, conscious, ontologically equivalent being to a human. That's what I would say. That's why I say you're not obligated to feed it, much the same way you're not obligated to feed like your pet dog if you can't, feed it.
Well, one thing to think about with that, I could be getting it wrong, but let's say, for example, it's a toddler, it's learned how to talk at this point, and it doesn't want to eat your food, but if it doesn't eat your food, it's going to starve. I might be going a little crazy with that one, but yeah. What?
Well,
hey guys, this has been a great discussion. I just want to let you know we are 7 minutes overtime currently. So if anybody's got one more comment to make on that, please go ahead and make your one more comment, and then we're going to wrap this up.
Well, I was going to say that the measurement is saying that the child is not a person; it's just a property until they be able to reject the parents. The problem with that is that there's been a case where a human locked up with no interactions developed in a way that they're stuck to the point that they're not even able to talk or understand anything. And they're mentally stuck beyond it. They're not able to move beyond. So that's kind of hard measurement, I say, to use.
Hello, guys.
Solarboy, what's up?
Yeah, what's up? What are you guys talking about?
You made it right for the end.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say quick, that was an excellent discussion. Pacna, thanks for bringing it up, and we will continue it either the next stream or perhaps I'll set up a separate stream that can be dedicated solely to that topic. However, I do always like to end on a light note. So I just want to say, for those of you who were following my gaming channel, I know I've been neglecting it lately, but recently Pokemon Sword and Pokemon Sword version, Pokemon Shield version was announced. So if you are not subscribed to my gaming channel, please do so. I'm going to try to get some more Pokemon Let's Go streams between then and now, but come this November, we'll be streaming one of those two games. So
yay.
That's fun.
Pikachu! Sorry.
All right. Anybody else have anything more lighthearted they wish to end on?
Follow me on Twitter because I still make daily sketches.
Pokemon Sword and Pokemon Shield. When's Pokemon Bow coming out?
When's Pokemon what?
When's Pokemon Bow coming out?
Bow and arrow.
I don't know. You know, sometimes they come out with a third version. Maybe that'll be like the third quasi version. Like they had, you know, there was Ruby, Sapphire, and then Emerald, and Diamond, Pearl, Platinum. There was X and Y, and then supposedly there was gonna be Z, but Z never happened. So maybe if there's Sword and Shield, there'll be Bow and Arrow. Will be like the third one.
Pokemon Rifle and Pokemon Shotgun.
There we go.
We can only hope that will be a future series.
Yeah.
That'd be a
I mean,
Texas
they have
version.
that in the Pokemon world, so it's entirely possible.
Well, yes, because the Galar region, which is the new one for these games, is based on the UK. Perhaps there will be a region based on Texas. And that'll be Pokemon Rifle and Pokemon Shotgun.
Oh, that would be fun.
Yes.
I wonder if you'll see a lot of stereotypical cowboys with their shotguns.
Mm-hmm.
You go up against the latest iteration of Team Rockets, like they're all cattle rustlers, all of them.
Oh, that'd be great.
They're all wearing those 10-gallon hats.
Oh my god. That'd be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea what you're talking about at all.
Okay. Well, let me just say this: you don't have to be you do not have to be a Pokemon fan to be a fan of mine. That's something that's primarily stuck to my gaming channel. But my 2 cents is essentially about 3 things: number 1, capitalism; number 2, gorgeous women; number 3, Pokemon. So
those are those are 3 of the best things ever. Those are 3 of the best things ever. So you've definitely got your finger on the pulse of what's awesome.
Yeah,
That is one of the best things ever. My thing I'm going to ask is, you don't interpret a lot of hot girls. You did one for your first episode, hoping we would get to see the hot manga girl, and we never saw her.
Well, sorry, we didn't get enough. We did. All right, we didn't get enough views on that. Do you want to? You want me to pull? I will quick pull up and screen share who I had in mind. But yeah, in the original Pokemon manga,
May.
Yeah, May Oak, not Daisy Oak, but May Oak. Gary's sister was particularly good looking.
Gorgeous. Yes.
Let me see if I can get that.
I'm just saying, how many of your channel has hot girls? I know you make the. I know you.
This is like your. I think this is like probably the worst part of your channel would be this stuff that's like so primal in its appeal.
That's a good thing.
All right. Well, like I said, you're entitled.
But that's your point.
No, you're right.
Entitled to your opinion.
I wish I had a positive note I could end on, but no.
I'm sorry. You wish you had a positive note you can end on, but
no.
what?
I've got a really long philosophical point. I don't really have any light notes to end on.
Okay, fair enough. All right, yeah, that is May Oak.
Oh my god,
nice.
Yes.
In later editions, her name was changed to Daisy, and the artist rendition wasn't quite so gorgeous. But all right, if anyone wants to give themselves a shout out, please go ahead.
Okay. I guess Pognasesim. I'm probably the newest patron on here. I don't think any of the people. It's my first time on here.
It is his first time. Welcome to him.
Welcome, buddy.
Glad to have you, and thank you for your support of the channel. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
All right, Night Shift.
Night Shift 10,000. I make videos on here, and they're awesome. They're about anarcho-capitalism and a few other things that I think are important. So please check them out and subscribe.
Myself and Night Shift have a collab coming out later this week. It's been delayed a few times, but it is coming out now. So
yes.
Scorch.
Scorch88. I mainly do a daily sketch. Follow me on Twitter, Scorch881. Just if you have any requests, always send it to me. I'll be glad to try it out.
All right, Pipsqueak.
Hey, I'm in Pipsqueak. I occasionally make memes and I shitpost on Twitter.
And he does a darn good job of it too. And last but certainly not least, Mag.
I don't have too much at this moment, so I'm gonna pass.
All All right. No problem. Anyways, thanks everybody for coming to hang out. As always, if you guys are interested in getting in on these conversations, it only takes $1 a month on either Subscribestar, Patreon, or Bitbacker. All 3 links are posted there. To everyone who does support my channel, thank you so much for making my channel possible. I love you guys so much for it. And even if you're not a patron or a regular viewer, I will always appreciate your support as well. So a 2-day with 2 cents obviously did not happen today in light of this monthly hangout. 2-day with 2 cents will be held Monday evening, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. So come back to discuss current events. That is also open to patrons, although I only typically have 3 or 4. I limit that to 3 or 4, and it's the higher tier patrons always have priority on that one. So without further ado, that is my 2 cents. Take it for what it's worth.